my great-grandfather told my grandfather and said, tomorrow we're going to go on a big adventure. And my grandfather says, adventure? He said, yes. He said, what are we going to do? He says, we're going to take the subway and we're going to go up into Upper Manhattan. Maybe we'll go to the Bronx. Or maybe we'll go to Upper Manhattan. But we're going to go, and these were parts unknown to my grandfather. I mean, he spent most of his young life in Brooklyn. But the newspaper said that if you're going to have a chance to see the total eclipse, you got to go at least as far north as 110th Street. There was a margin of error. Some said it might be visible as far south as Columbus Circle, the total eclipse. Others said maybe as far north as 110th Street. Ultimately, Con Edison, the Consolidated Edison people, put people on the roofs of buildings all along and around the area of the southern limit of the eclipse and told them to take note of whether they saw a total eclipse or a partial eclipse. And apparently, the observer at 220 Riverside Drive on 96th Street still was seeing a little bit of sun left lingering outside of the sun's rim. So he saw a partial, but the person at 230 Riverside Drive across the street on 96th Street said he saw a total eclipse for a second or two. So 96th Street turned out to be the zone where the southern limit of the eclipse was. Anywhere south of there, you only saw a partial. You had to go north to get the full effect of a total eclipse of the sun. Okay. Goodbye. 2 days before the eclipse, January 22nd, 1925, a double-barreled storm system, 2 low-pressure systems, here and here. I'm sorry, it's a little difficult. New York City's right here. Here and here, cold high-pressure system. And you know what that translated to on January 22nd? What'd you see a lot of this winter? Snow, the white stuff. Yes, indeed. Snow, rain, sleet, gale force winds, 7 inches of snow 2 days before the eclipse. If the eclipse were that day, nobody was going to see anything. So that was 2 days ago, but 2 days before the event, the big event, the eclipse. How about January 23rd? Well, on January 23rd, the snowstorm was now away from our area. It was moving up into the Maritimes of Canada. And a large, fair weather, high pressure system was building in. But you see, the high was building in so quickly, and the storm was intensifying so rapidly. You see those squiggly lines? Back in the day, they used to have these lines in the New York Times on the weather page. They don't do that anymore, because nobody understands what these squiggly lines are. They're isobars, lines of equal atmospheric pressure. When the isobars get very tightly placed together, we have a pressure gradient, and when there's a pressure gradient, that means we get a lot of wind. And notice, if you will, the direction of the winds. The winds go around a low pressure system in a counterclockwise fashion. They go around a high pressure system in a clockwise fashion. So there were some very fierce, gusty winds that were being directed toward the New York area on a north-northwestern trajectory, coming from Canada. And so, the day before the big event, January 23rd, bitter gale. The year's coldest day, the mercury near 0. The winds were gusting to over 40 miles per hour. The chill factor made it feel like it was something like 40 to 50 below 0. Now, can you imagine trying to observe a total eclipse of the sun in those kind of conditions? And by the way, it was partially clear. The big billowing cumulus clouds flying by at a rapid speed. And if it just happened to be that the eclipse hit total when one of those big clouds passed on in front of the sun, you were royally you-know-what. So, but a warmer day was promised for the next day. You wanted good weather. Please let it be good weather for the next day. January 24th, the day of the total eclipse of the sun. In the New York Times, the day before the eclipse, somebody had written to the Times and wrote a little ditty called Eclipse Eve. I had forgotten how I used to pray for clear tomorrows. And we could go on, or blue, no longer one golden ray. Tonight, the first in years, I was aware of a whispering that long-forgotten prayer. Dear God, tomorrow make a sunny day. A snowstorm 2 days ago. A windy, cold, bitter day today. What will tomorrow bring? Well, the weather maps for the big event couldn't have been better. Look at what we have here. A big fair weather high pressure system right over the eastern United States. Perfect This is what you want. If you want fair weather, you want a big high right over you. And that's what they got on that day, the morning of the great eclipse, January 24th, 1925. By the way, you know, you read the New York Times editorials today. What do you read about in an editorial? Hillary Clinton getting rid of her emails. The terror in the Middle East. You know, crooked government officials or whatever. That's what you get today. But back on January 24th, 1925, I want you to see, I want to read the first part of the editorial of the New York Times that morning. This is the editorial in the New York Times on that eclipse day. For the weatherman, it was the day before, it was January 23rd. For the weatherman on top of the Whitehall building tomorrow morning, it is the opportunity of a lifetime. All of his forecasts that fail to come off will be forgiven if he succeeds in providing us with a cloudless sky between 8 and 10:29 a.m. All of his forecasts that came true will be forgotten if he fails to provide the proper scenic background for what is literally the greatest show on earth. So everybody was banking on good weather, and it appears that the good weather is indeed headed our way for the event. Front page, New York Times, January 24th, clear view for eclipse today, experts to watch on land and in the air. Wind delay is the start of the Los Angeles. What's the Los Angeles? We'll find out in just a moment. And one of the great ironies that I've often found concerning this particular event, I mean, you know, it kind of blows my mind. I don't know if it'll blow your mind as well. The moment when the sun went into total eclipse and darkness was cast upon the New York City area, that moment occurred at, look at the time, 9/11. 9/11 was totality. And of course, now you mention 9/11, and it has a different perspective, a different point of view to all of us. But then, 9/11, everybody was looking forward to 9/11. Every time I see this picture, the first thing that comes into my head is King Kong. LaGuardia Airport and Idlewild, later to become JFK Airport, did not exist, but there was an airport in New York by the name of Mitchell Field. And for the eclipse, it was decided that the greatest concentration of aircraft since the Great War, World War I, would attempt to observe the eclipse at altitudes between 5 and 15,000 feet. And so, 25 aircraft with photographers and with astronomers on board were to fly up. Now remember, it was a bitter cold morning that morning. The morning of the eclipse, on the streets of New York, it was something like 0 degrees. Interestingly though, we had an atmospheric inversion. What is that? That means it got milder as you got higher up into the atmosphere. And so a lot of these planes, as they headed up into the sky, and some of them passing, you know, some of them went to Danbury, Connecticut, others to Montauk Point. They spread out in a great fan to various spots in the totality path. As they went in ascending spirals, one reporter noted that at about 15,000 feet, the temperature jumped 20 degrees. Of course, you were also flying at 120 miles an hour into the wind, so the chill factor must have negated that sudden warm-up, but it got warmer as you got higher up. The New York Times had hired an astronomer, Professor Wilhelm Leuten, very distinguished German astronomer. He was going to write about the eclipse in the New York Times. This was his pilot, Captain Davenport, Major Davenport Johnson. And notice, if you will, the very, very sophisticated photographic equipment that Professor Wilhelm Leuten was taking with him. That was his camera right there. And he wrote, one of the big difficulties he found was during totality, he was taking one picture, and he said, there wasn't enough light for me to see whether or not I was going to land on the correct number. Back in the day, I don't know how many of you remember this, when you used to take pictures with, you know, what, Instamatic or Brownie cameras or whatever, you took the picture, you wound it, there was a little red window, you know, and you saw it went from number 3, the next picture was number 4, or the next picture was number 5, and Professor Leuten was saying, I didn't know, as I was turning the film, whether or not I was going to land on the correct frame, or whether or not I was going to take a double exposure or not. But can you imagine, I mean, like, look at that thing, can you imagine trying to handle that in a small, bouncy plane at 120 miles an hour with temperatures of like 20 degrees. Oh yes, the Los Angeles. The Los Angeles was, at that time, in 1925, the largest airship. The largest, well, what is it, a blimp on steroids. 656 feet across from tip to tip. That's what, the equivalent of 2 Yankee stadiums? Tremendously large thing and what they had planned to do was they planned to, this was a Navy-owned airship. It was only built and commissioned 6 months before the eclipse in the middle part of 1924. And they had planned to fly this out of Lakehurst, New Jersey. They were going to fly to around the Nantucket Island area, and there were scientists on board that were going to photograph the eclipse. Come the morning of the eclipse, it was almost a disaster of the first magnitude, because it was still kind of gusty early in the morning before sunrise, and so all these people are on board. I don't know how many dozens of men, had to, hold on to ropes, and before the airship was launched. And the gust of wind came, and all of a sudden, it lifted the airship up, and as it lifted it up, all the guys who were hanging on with the rope were suddenly lifted up as well. I mean, can you imagine suddenly being taken up into the air, like 10, 20, 50 feet? Yeah. Fortunately, the pilot, who was a seasoned veteran at flying oversized balloons, ordered the engines to get started, which they did. The ship, which was almost tilted over on one side, tilted back, and he was able to bring the ship back down. The men let go of the ropes, and off it went to go after the total eclipse of the sun early that morning of January 24th, 1925. This, by the way, was one of the very few airships that did not come into a cataclysmic end. The Shenandoah, the Akron, a couple of other airships all ran through heavy weather and got ripped apart, or ended up crash landing, killing people, or whatever. The Los Angeles was one of the very few airships at that time that went through its entire life without going through any kind of major disaster. It was in service from 1924 to 1932, and in 1939 they finally said, let's take this stupid thing apart, and they did, and that was that. Not to say that there were any other close calls with the Los Angeles. For example, 2 years later in 1927, while it was moored at Lakehurst, New Jersey, a big gust of wind came, and the thing was almost made vertical, 85-degree angle, they said. And I guess they had to wait for the wind to die down. They didn't have it tied down properly enough. But in any case, no such problems, thankfully, on eclipse morning with the Los Angeles. Here's some photos I took from out of the New York Times. By the way, if you ever get a chance to go to the look at the New York Times from that year, fascinating read, leading up to and in the days after the event. This is Mayor Hyland. This is the mayor of New York back in 1925. The mayor didn't exactly have it all together. Everybody was migrating north to Upper Manhattan, to the Bronx, to see the total eclipse. Mayor Hyland decided he was going to make a political speech during the eclipse on the steps of City Hall in Lower Manhattan outside of the eclipse zone. And he had maybe, I don't know, 5, 10 people there. In part of his speech he said, the sun may be in eclipse, but New York never. If you go to Staten Island, by the way, and drive on Highland Boulevard, that boulevard is named for Mayor Hyland. Here's the President of the United States, Calvin Coolidge, with his wife. Well, I think later on Calvin Coolidge knew that this was just merely a photo op. He really didn't have much interest in the eclipse. He would have preferred to sit at his desk that Saturday morning at 9 a.m. rather than have to go outside to look at the eclipse with his wife. And he didn't say very much. I know some of you were historians or whatever. He was known as Silent Cal. He said very few words. At one time a woman reporter came up to him and said, Mr. President, I have a bet that I can get you to say more than 2 words during my interview. And the president looked down and said, you lose. In Washington, D.C., the eclipse was partial. Front page, New York Times, day after the eclipse. You can see it certainly made a big splash. By the way, remember the first announcement I said in that box on the front page? That was pretty much what the first announcement looked like. So it went from something this size to something this size. In fact, the first 5 pages of the New York Times that day, in tiny pica type, by the way, was all about everything that you want to know about this eclipse. Spectacular. Just it was a few seconds late. according to the calculations, but the whole city just stopped and watched this amazing sight. And my grandfather, which was, as I said, was one of them. Here's a picture that was taken from Bronx Park. I don't think that's too far away from here. Notice, if you will, there was this one spike up at the upper right-hand corner in the corona here. This is a view of the snow-covered ground during the total phase of the eclipse that morning. Now, you didn't necessarily have to take pictures. You could also observe it a different way. This was a gentleman named Howard Russell Butler, and he was hired back in 1918 to try to make a painting of the eclipse that occurred in that year out over the western United States, over Oregon. He was so successful that he was asked to make another painting when an eclipse passed across Lompoc, California back in 1923. And for this eclipse in 1925, the Naval Observatory asked him again to try to make a painting of the eclipse from Middletown, Connecticut. Now, Mr. Butler, Howard Russell Butler, was a portrait painter, and he would sometimes ask his subject to sit for 2 hours at a time, and sometimes there'd be like 6, 7, 8 different appointments before he finally got it all right. Total eclipse of the sun in Middletown, Connecticut was only going to last 115 seconds, but from the previous 2 eclipses, he had developed a kind of a code. He made a quick sketch, and the code, what level of darkness, what colors to use, or whatever like that. Then he would bring it back to his studio, and then he would work based upon his notes on what he saw in the sky. Remember that on the photograph, that big spike in the upper right-hand corner of the eclipse? Well, here's Howard Russell Butler's painting of that eclipse. They say that his painting conveyed the true flavor of the eclipse. And his painting, actually 3 of them, were for many years displayed at the Museum of Natural History Hayden Planetarium, and they're now in storage. And I've been trying to get Dr. Tyson, the director of the planetarium, to pull them out of storage, especially as we get closer to the big event in a couple of years. These magnificent renderings of a total solar eclipse. And here you see the 1925 eclipse as rendered by Howard Russell Butler. This next view is a group of people in Pleasantville, New York. And the only thing that is worth mentioning in this particular picture of these people who were set up, I think they were Boy Scouts or whatever, of course properly attired because it was a bitterly cold morning. But this person right over here, well, his father would become a very, very important person in American history. His father would become in a couple of years the governor of New York, and in 7 years his father would become president of the United States. This young man over here, next to this telescope, is FDR Jr., Franklin Delano Roosevelt Jr. And he was there with his friends, his fellow scouts, observing the eclipse that morning from, Pleasantville, New York. Oh, yes, the deer, the animals. The Bronx Zoo was right in the midst of this eclipse track. And as you can see here, it's reported in the New York Times, deer race in panic as sun fades in view. Monkeys quit chattering, huddle together, birds go to their roost, and then they greet the second morning of the day with song. Meanwhile, an alligator was roaring, rah, rah, intermittently during the eclipse. The most interesting thing, according to the person who was the curator of the bird section of the Bronx Zoo, was the reaction of one of the rarest birds, the Prince Rupert's blue bird of paradise. And it was after the eclipse was over that one of the people yelled out to the curator, "The blue bird of paradise is ruffling up!" And apparently, from the description in the New York Times, the blue bird of paradise was doing the following right after the eclipse, total eclipse ended. It started flapping its wings, like so, which it rarely ever did, and then all of a sudden, it took the wings, spread it out as far as it could go, and he stood on one leg, like this. And the curator had never seen anything like that before. And he said, I guess the experience of having 2 mornings within just an hour or 2 completely confused the bird. He thought it was a bird. But the blue bird of paradise was the only one who was befuddled. The New York Times said this was the most interesting case of bird reaction. But the rival New York Herald Tribune felt differently. According to the Herald Tribune, bozo the zoo owl was badly fooled. You thought Bozo was the name of a clown? Ah, the clown took his name from an owl. Badly fooled by eclipse, Mr. Toomey reports. He wakes up, starts hooting as the other birds quit singing, then sun slips out right in the middle of his fourth hoo, and he quits in disgust. This was a hoot owl, or a barred owl. So I went through and tried to find a picture of what a barred owl looked like, but especially a barred owl that looked kind of PO'd, and he had gotten awakened by an eclipse of the sun. The best thing I could come up with was that. That looks like a rather, PO'd owl, if you ask me. Well, anyway. The term diamond ring, which is so ubiquitous now, whenever we talk about the last little bit of sunlight disappearing in a valley or a mountain, behind the mountain of the moon, and totality begins, we call that the diamond ring effect. It happens during the time when the sun is moving into totality, and it happens when the sun is moving out of totality. And for the first time, in the New York Times apparently, that was when they used that term. It had never been used before, apparently, with any other eclipse. And in fact, the person who wrote the story referred to it initially as the engagement ring effect, not the diamond ring. And the scientists, well, they were so busy with their cameras and pictures and instrumentation that a lot of them missed out on the so-called diamond ring effect. What does a diamond ring look like? Well, something like this as the sun is going into totality. It was the pictures that was taken of the sun, and you can also see even a red flame, prominence there at the upper part of the sun's disk. So, the New York Times had this picture of this young fellow standing on a park bench looking through his piece of smoke glass, and the caption, "Studying this eclipse to be ready for the next one in 2024. 2024? Why, that's only 9 years from now. We're going to see another total eclipse of the sun here in New York City in 2024. Well, no, not really. Yeah, right. Actually, that's the case. Why do the newspapers say 2024? They said it because of this guy. This gentleman, one of the most renowned celestial mechanics and astronomers of the 19th century, Professor Theodor Ritter von Apolzer. And he did calculations, a lot of calculations, on the orbits of meteor showers and comets, and checking out the orbits of the planets. And Professor Apolzer, as his opus maximus, something that he could leave behind after he departed this dear Earth of ours, and what he worked on for many, many, many years was the canon of eclipses, the canon de finsternis, as they would say in German. And here it is. And he had calculated the circumstances of 13,200 eclipses, 5,000 of the sun, and 8,200 of the moon. The canon de finsternis. And it was from this book that, at that time, and for a good number of years thereafter, predictions about future eclipses were based. And he did this all by hand. There were no PCs, there were no calculators or computers back in 1887. And the man, this must have killed him, because he had just finished everything. They handed him the final manuscript, they being the publishers, on his deathbed. He never saw it fully in print, but he had completed this just before he died. And among the tables and tables and tables of information about the eclipses were rather crude drawings, crude maps showing you the paths of future total eclipses. Now let me tell you, on behalf of the good professor, that if you sat down and went through all of those tables and did the calculations, you would come within maybe 20 or 25 miles of the actual path of the eclipse. They were pretty damn good calculations. But you see, Professor Apolzer wanted to save a little time. So when it got to the part where he had to do the paths of the eclipse, what he did was, he did some shorthand work. Instead of calculating meticulously, every single point along the eclipse track, he said, well, I'm going to do this quick. And so he calculated the beginning, which is off the screen over here, the middle over here, and the end. And then he inscribed an arc through the 3 points. And that's what he ended up doing for his eclipse maps. Well, he did that, you see here, Roman numeral 4, that's the month of April, 8/2024, and the eclipse path from across Baja California, from the Gulf Coast up, and here's New York City, right here, right smack in the eclipse path. And so that's what everybody was basing their computations on. That's what everybody was saying. The next eclipse for New York City will be April 8th, 2024. Not! You can only get certain, you can only get so accurate if you're only going to use 3 points. And as it's been found a number of times, when you do it this way, you're going to be off by maybe a couple hundred miles. And sadly, that is the case with the 2024 eclipse. Because as you will see in this map that was made by the United States Naval Observatory for April 8, 2024 eclipse, the eclipse path, it's similar to what Opposer had, except it's not going to go over New York City. Instead, it's going to move across upstate New York. Buffalo, again, as in 1925, in the eclipse path. Syracuse, in the eclipse path. Montreal, in the eclipse path. New York, 91% of a partial eclipse. But this is not terrible. My wife and I, we went on a little vacation last September. We drove up to Syracuse where the state fair was being held. It took us 3 hours. Big deal. So take a 3-hour trip north and you'll be able to see a total eclipse of the sun in 2024. By the way, the 2017 eclipse, the path of the 2017 eclipse right about here in lower Indiana and Kentucky crosses the 2024 eclipse path. So if you happen to live right about in this part of the country, you'll see 2 total solar eclipses in 7 years. Whereas the normal for a single place on Earth to see a total eclipse is once every 375 years. So if you're lucky, if you live in part of Kentucky or Indiana, you'll get to see this great sky show. The next total eclipse of the sun for New York City, there'll be a bit of a wait. It happens on a Tuesday morning, May 1st, 2079. At sunrise, or just after sunrise. And think about that, May 1st is when? Later next week. So all you have to do is stick around for another 64 years, and you'll be able to see a total eclipse of the sun from here in the New York City metropolitan area. I don't intend to be here. I will be myself. I think I'm going to be like 126 years old. Maybe this young man over here, or the young people will be around. Stick to your vitamins. Do a lot of good wishing, but for the rest of us, oh well. Right above the horizon, by the way, I saw a total eclipse of the sun off of Nova Scotia in 1999 on a ship. The sun was only a couple of degrees above the horizon, but we did get a chance to see that total eclipse of the sun. It was a gorgeous sight. And I don't think anybody in New York is going to be seeing it. It's a clear morning. If you're on the street, how are you going to see something that's that low in the sky? It ought to be on the roof. The Empire State Building is still standing. Interestingly, eclipses recur. They just don't happen, by happenstance. There's a very definitive methodology to the occurrence of eclipses. They have to occur at a certain time when the moon is near one of the nodes, either ascending or descending node in its orbit. Because we don't get eclipses every month. The orbit is tilted relative to our plane as we go around the sun by about 5 degrees. So we don't get eclipses every month. They happen only when the moon happens to be near one of these nodal crossing points. And of course also you have to have the moon close enough to cover the sun completely to be a total eclipse. But there's a cycle that was known back to the ancient Sumerians. Back the 23rd century BC, they knew about this, called the Saros. Saros is Greek for repetition. Eclipses repeat, they recur at 18-year plus intervals. 18 years, 10 and a third, or 11 and a third days, depending upon how many leap years have intervened in that 18-year time frame. An eclipse, the circumstances of an eclipse will recur again. And notice I said 1/3. 18 years, 10 and 1/3 days. So in 1/3 of a day, what happens? The Earth turns. 1/3 of a day, 120 degrees. So here's our eclipse that my grandfather saw. January 24th, 1925. If you add 18 years, 10 and a third days to 1925, January 24th, you come up with what? February 4th, 1943. But it doesn't happen along the same path as it did in 1925. The Earth has turned 1/3 of the way. So now we go here. The eclipse returns, but this time not over North America, but it starts over Asia, goes across Hokkaido in northern Japan, across the Pacific, and comes to an end in Alaska.